Welcome, listeners, to another episode of our podcast, Boots on the Ground. Today's episode is dedicated to all of our real estate newbies that are looking to take their first plunge into the Toronto real estate market. Buying a home or condo is certainly not a decision you can make overnight. It's a process. And here at Fox Marin, we make sure to fully understand your vision of the perfect home or investment and help you turn that vision into a reality. We believe in the power of education. The more you know, the more comfortable and stress-free your journey becomes. Ralph Fox, our esteemed broker of record at Fox Marin, will help us decipher the complex landscape and shed light on essential aspects of the acquisition process. From understanding the difference between a mortgage broker and a bank specialist to overcoming the fear of overpaying or getting into one of those bidding wars, we've got it all covered. In this deep dive, we'll talk about the important points that every first-time home buyer should be aware of before kicking off their search. My name is Kori Marin. I'm also a broker and co-founder of Fox Marin Associates, and I will be your host today for this episode. I am so excited to take this deep dive with my very good partner in crime in life and in business, Mr. Ralph Fox. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Kori. Thank you so much for having me here today. And we miss Ian Busher, who is unable to join us.
I know. I think he's doing something called a weekend vacation, which is very rare for anyone on the team to take. I think it's like he's taking a whole 48 hours off.
We'll have to ask him what it was like when he comes back.
Yes, we will. What was that like? Yeah. I'm sure he's probably still working.
Yeah.
The only way you can take true time off in this business is if you go somewhere where there absolutely is actually no Wi-Fi for reals. Not the fake no Wi-Fi, but like actually no Wi-Fi.
It's so funny how there's like this misnomer or actually this understanding unwritten on our team where if you want to get busy, go away on a vacation. And I cannot tell you how many vacations we've spent on our computers, laptops, by the pool, in the lobby, in the room, doing business when, we didn't even think that we were going to be busy. If you're in real estate and you want to get busy, just book a vacation. Totally. If you're a little quiet, the universe will provide and it will do it as soon as you get on that plane.
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm so excited that we're going to be able to talk about this today. Just a little bit of background for our viewership. So when Ralph, myself, and the team, we have new clients on board with Fox Marin, whether it's on the buy side, the pre-construction side, the selling side, we spend a lot of time front loading all of our clients before we even kickstart the process. And we spend a lot of time on education. So I thought today's session really could be dedicated to taking an inside look as to what it's like when we're onboarding a brand new buyer. And a new buyer being somebody that's probably just getting into this for the first time. They're looking at Toronto acquisitions for the first time. They're getting their feet wet. It's very overwhelming. There's a lot of moving parts and lots to think about. And Ralph, who leads our team and our buyer team, spends a lot of time speaking with his exact clientele at this exact stage in their process. And you could not be a better resource for our newbies out there that are listening. Please capitalize on this opportunity to listen to Ralph's wisdom about the Toronto real estate market and being a first-time home buyer or anywhere in between. I think you're going to get a lot out of this conversation. So we have not prepped Ralph for this talk today, so he is going to fly off the cuff a little bit. And I'm going to shoot some questions over to you that I have prepared because that is my personality type that I need to be prepared. Shocking when you think about the two of us. One of us being much more instinctual and one of us being much more type A and preparatory, shall we say.
We'll let the audience determine who is who.
Yeah, it's pretty easy to figure out.
And not just take your word for granted.
Okay, so let's get into it because there's a lot to cover here. And in the show notes, I'll try to break this down too. So if there's things you want to skip over and get to the meat and potatoes, you can get there quicker without having to listen to us go on and on about certain aspects. But I think if you do listen to this, stack it from beginning to end because I know it's going to be jammed with great tidbits that will help you kickstart your search. So awesome. First place to start, Mr. Ralph Fox. Mm-hmm. For our viewers out there that don't know you or us, can you give a little high level background about who you are, what you do, and why you are in the business of real estate.
So before getting involved with real estate, I've always had a very strong entrepreneurial and sales background, going back all the way to the age of 13 when I started my first business venture. And I'd say that I've always really had a long-term perspective on business and sales and making money. And so I've that passion has been instilled in me from a very early age, and something that's transitioned over the years. I've been investing in real estate for quite a long time, and it's something that I think I've always been drawn to. And when I became an agent, maybe 16 or 17 years ago, prior to that, I had a company and I sold that company. And I really just always realized that on a per hour basis, I'd made more money investing in real estate. And that's where really I saw the future, and the future of our city being something with tremendous amounts of upside that was unrecognized. And I got a little taste of that from investing prior to becoming an agent. And when I became an agent, it was really drawn out of self-interest to continue to invest on my own. And over time, people started gravitating towards me for advice, and I started getting into development, and it led me down this whole unintended path where now I am a co-owner and co-founder and broker of record of Fox Marin. And Kori, being my partner, has joined me along this tremendously interesting journey. And we have our own brokerage that operates in central and downtown Toronto. We have an awesome team. And I'd say over the years, I've probably transacted in somewhere between $750 million to $1 billion worth of real estate. Alongside Kori, built out a real estate portfolio. On the transaction side, we've sold projects for developers in downtown Toronto. We've represented a significant amount of investor clients from both pre-construction to resale. It's been a tremendous journey, and I think I've gotten the opportunity to see all sides of the market, in up markets and sideways markets and down markets, and really have been able to see Toronto real estate from the perspective of an investor, of a broker of record, of a real estate agent, and have gotten the opportunity to work with everybody from some of the largest developers in Canada, all the way down to a first-time renter looking for that one bedroom in downtown Toronto, and everything in between.
That's a great answer. Thank you.
Yeah.
So with so many real estate agents, brokers, brokerages, blogs, and podcasts, is there a reason or two that our listeners today should consider your advice over any of the others?
I don't think anybody should blindly listen to anybody else on any topic. I think when you're looking at getting into something, especially like Toronto real estate, which can be extremely overwhelming because there is almost too much information out there. And it's really important, I think, to find your own truth and look for the right guidance and look for the right source of information that resonates with you and makes sense with you. There are many other approaches and ideas about the market and how the market has performed and how to navigate your way through it and what the market will look like in the future. But I think it's really important for you to find someone or a resource or resources that really feel like to you they are the real deal, and what they're saying feels and has a truth to it that is something worth moving forward with. And so it's really important to do your research, to do your due diligence. I find it shocking how people will spend more time planning a vacation or scrolling through Instagram than they will in terms of who they're going to partner with or get advice for making the largest transaction or the largest investments that they're ever going to make. You should definitely spend time trying to find where the best sources of information are and who can mentor and who can help you navigate through this market, which moves very quickly and is not for the faint of heart.
Excellent. So, in 3 sentences or less, which I know might be challenging for you when it comes to this topic.
Yeah.
So, 3 sentences or less. What is the current state of the Toronto real estate climate at present?
It's a really interesting question because it's an interesting time to ask that question. Right now, we are in a seller's market. However, there are a lot of forces outside the market, like inflation and interest rates. And we've had recent rise in interest rates successively from the Bank of Canada in June and July, which is causing people to have a little bit of pause. And I think that there's a shift in sentiment right now that's changing the landscape from what it was in the spring as we go into summer, which is a slower time. So I think it's going to be a slower market where people who move forward either to buy, sell, or rent are going to do so with a lot of thought. And they're not going to be FOMOing into any decisions, which in my opinion is always a good thing. And I think we're going into a thoughtful market where things move slower and more cautiously than they have in the past or what is in traditionally Toronto real estate.
Okay.
And I know that was a couple paragraphs. I'm sorry.
For you, I thought that was quite concise. So thank you.
Can't put baby in a box.
In a corner, Ralph, in a corner.
Yeah, well, that too.
Okay, with that being said, with your brief overview on the market, using a yes or no response.
Oh boy.
Is this a good time to buy right now?
It depends on the opportunity.
I knew you were going to answer it exactly as you did.
At the end of the day, if you buy today and you zoom out 5 years from now, you're probably going to do really well. However, there's a lot of caveats to that depending upon your situation, the reasons for making that decision, and if you're in a position to wait for a short period of time, there may be other opportunities as more inventory hopefully comes online into the fall.
So if we had a brand new buyer that was starting their search, getting their feet wet, trying to get organized, they're focusing on Toronto specifically, where would you suggest they kickstart their journey? Would they kickstart their journey by finding an agent first? Are they going off to their bank and talking to, a financial advisor or a mortgage specialist? Are they getting pre-approved? Where would you start in the process if you're like, you know what? I feel like I'm ready and I want to do this. What's the first thing a buyer should be doing?
Usually the first decision would be to understand your financial situation. And it can take some time getting all the necessary documents that would satisfy a lender to be able to give you an approval. But I think it's really important just to understand what your range at least would be, so that you have a little bit more context in terms of what is possible given your search parameters and your ability to actually purchase a property. And oftentimes, plus or minus, I find that people can be really surprised either by how much they can get on a mortgage or a mortgage pre-approval. And sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes they're like, wow, I can't believe this is all I can qualify for. So I think getting an understanding of what that looks like and having all of the information put together, which can take time, is really, really important for somebody to do when considering moving forward on buying or investing in Toronto real estate.
And are they going to their bank for this, or are they going and speaking with a mortgage broker? And could you explain the difference between the two for anyone who doesn't know what that might be?
Yeah, that's a great question. We always recommend working with a mortgage broker versus a mortgage specialist at a bank. We generally find that a mortgage broker has a much wider net in terms of available options that could work for a specific client. And sometimes it's even not a Schedule A lender, can turn out to be a Schedule B lender. And they're really good at understanding how to package you to a specific lender that might be the best fit. Sometimes it's rate, but other times it's in terms of a lender's threshold for risk or if you're an entrepreneur, sometimes a specific bank may be more welcoming or friendly at a specific point in time because lenders are always changing. That would be the best fit. And then I think the second aspect of that is typically, without making a mass generalization, retail mortgage specialists at banks generally are not very experienced. They do not generally move very quickly, and they don't generally tend to have the availability or the willingness to customize solutions for a potential buyer or investor. And so, in our experience, we've always found that a good mortgage broker has far more experience, is working to customize the experience to the potential borrower, and is much more available and open to communication and able to move quicker than any mortgage specialist I've ever worked with. And from our end, if we've ever, and it's very rare that, when somebody's pre-approved that there's an issue after they've purchased a property or offered on a property. But if there are, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be with a bank and a bank mortgage specialist.
Okay. So the first thing a buyer should do is get their financing in order, get their pre-approval in place. And you're recommending that they speak to a mortgage broker versus a lender at a bank.
Yep.
Where would they find a good mortgage broker? And does it cost the buyer anything to use the services of a mortgage broker?
No, that's a great question. So, similar to working with a buyer agent, there is no cost to the customer. And from the side of a mortgage broker, whatever commissions or fees are payable come direct from the lender to the actual mortgage broker. So there's no cost to somebody in working with a mortgage broker. The upside, though, is tremendous from a customer experience from beginning to end when you're working with a good mortgage broker. Now, we at Fox Marin have a fantastic mortgage broker that we work almost exclusively with, but we do have also some great relationships with other mortgage brokers and even banks that can give our clients the best option. And the one thing that I always say to somebody looking to get a loan or get a pre-approval when they're interviewing mortgage brokers is it's very complicated sometimes, and sometimes it can seem very overwhelming, especially the amount of paperwork and documents they need, and then explaining the different options that are available.
I know, they're like
and
the
everything
subprime
else.
this, calculated by this, and amortized by this. I'm like, what?
Yeah. And be able to show you different scenarios and walk you through those scenarios. And sometimes you have to listen to that or sit through that 2 or 3 times. So it's really important that when you're working with a mortgage broker, that it's somebody who you feel is patient and is going to take the time to explain everything to you, sometimes 2 or 3 times, so that you really understand and grasp the process. And so you can position yourselves to make the best financial position working with somebody that you feel that you can trust and communicate well with.
Okay. So this all makes sense. So you're getting pre-approved, you're working with a broker that you trust, you feel like you can communicate with, they can speak in layman's terms, but you have no idea what's happening, which I totally get and respect and have been there many times myself personally. I'm always like, what? What's happening? So now that you've got that set up, you have an idea of what your budget is or what you can afford on paper per se. Is your next step in the process to find a real estate agent? And if that's the case, there's, 68,000 real estate agents in Toronto or the GTA. How would a new buyer find a good agent, and how would you recommend that they go about with that search for that relationship?
I think it's just so important that you really do your own due diligence and that you interview and you speak to at least several agents before you actually make a commitment to work with one. I think that the bar can be very low in Toronto real estate for real estate agents and brokers, from experience to professionalism to the ability to navigate through the market, advise properly. All of those things are really, really important. Again, like this is such a large chess move financially to set yourself up for the future, both from an investment standpoint and from a lifestyle standpoint. Like it really is important that you find a really good partner and not just use your cousin's brother or your neighbor who just got their license. Typically, as listing agents, we see so many scenarios where we're just nodding our heads, being like, I feel so sorry for these people who are being represented by this person who can't even submit paperwork or communicate or understand pricing. These things are just so foundational to really setting yourselves up for success. And so talk to people, do your due diligence, Google reviews, online presence, like go to an agent's website and see if they've updated their blogs. Like there's nothing worse than going to a website and seeing a blog from 2019 as the most recent post. Are they active on social media? Are they responsive to current events? Are they up to date? Are they investors themselves? What is their experience? What is their process? How are they going to educate you in the process so that you can make the best decision for yourselves? And so there's so many factors. And then again, just tying in, going back to what I was saying about mortgage broker, like, you never want to feel that you're pressured into making a decision or making decisions that you don't understand. And so I think it's really important to be, when you make that decision, feeling comfortable with the level of trust, sophistication, communication that you have when considering working with somebody. And so talk to several people, talk to people who've had good experiences working with agents, talk to people that who've had bad experiences and ask them why those experiences were bad. But again, it's just so important when making such a large financial and life decision that could set you on many different trajectories, to make sure that you have the right partner, the right advisor, the right person or people or group to give you the best possible guidance, and make sure that it's something that resonates with you from day one.
And I think it's so interesting that you'll often hear about sellers interviewing multiple agents to sell their home, but you don't often hear about potential clients interviewing buyer agents to acquire a home. And in some regards, the acquisition side is a longer relationship, and it can last 6 to 12 to 1+ years that you're working with that person or that partner, trying to find that perfect investment or condo or home, family home, what have you. And it's a lot of time that you spend with this person, and it's a very emotional relationship, and it can be sensitive at times, and it's high stakes, I think is a better way to describe it. And so don't ever be embarrassed to put the time into interviewing agents on the acquisition or the buy side. And I think that buyer agent will really respect you for doing it as well. And if they don't, then it's just not the right fit. So I always really love and appreciate when we as a team are interviewed on the buy side. We often are on the listing side, and that's very common to see, but you don't always see it on the buyer side. And when we do get interviewed, I'm always highly respect that client for putting in that elbow grease up front, because they are protecting their asset and their decision and their integrity and their values by doing it. So don't ever be embarrassed for wanting to ask questions and spend some time in that exploratory phase before bringing on a buyer agent to help you find a property.
And that's great advice, Kori. And I think the other thing to be thinking about is, a lot of people don't put as much weight on who their agent is on the buyer side. And going back to what you're saying, sometimes that relationship is a longer relationship, is a more complicated relationship. And it's one that I think from the outset, you should really respect if you're a potential buyer or a new investor, because the amount of capital that you're putting down and the amount of time that's going to be involved, you really want to get this right on the first shot. It's just one of those things where you don't want to be trying to figure it out second, third, or fourth time around, because the delta in a mistake can be really, really significant from not just from a financial standpoint, but from a peace of mind standpoint and from a lifestyle standpoint. So lots to think about. It's just really important to be very thoughtful with who you work with and how you choose to proceed, because it's a big market. Things move awfully quickly and things can change. And there's a lot of pitfalls that you definitely want to avoid that you don't even know that are out there.
And that flows so well into my next question. So when we're working with new buyers, what are they most concerned about upfront? Are they concerned about overpaying? Are they concerned about the bidding war? Are they concerned about making a mistake? Where do people feel the most nervous when they're kicking off their buy for the first time in this market?
Yeah, I think they're awfully concerned about making a mistake. And I think that sometimes that fear can lead them to making even more mistakes because you aren't really thinking about your situation clearly. I mean, it's really good in any business situation to acknowledge the downside and what your fears are, to articulate that, to understand the pros and cons to the decision that you're considering making, and then move forward from there. And a lot of people have trouble moving from that stage. And sometimes that can be with who they're working with, and other times it could just be where they're at in terms of life experience and in terms of risk threshold. But I think people overall, especially when they're looking to make that first investment or looking to make that first purchase, can be generally very nervous and fearful. And I think providing yourself with the best information and the best resources and surrounding yourself with the best team who have the best record of successful outcomes is going to increase your probability of a happy result.
And can you tell me what a mistake would look like in the Toronto real estate market? So I agree, people are afraid of making a mistake.
Yeah.
Give us a little bit of context about what a mistake could be. And is there such thing as making a mistake in the Toronto real estate market?
For sure. The Toronto real estate market, because prices have gone up on such a huge trajectory over the last couple of decades and will continue to do so in the future, mistakes can get erased or mitigated quicker and be more forgiving than other markets. However, there's an opportunity cost to your time and your money and your resources. And I think it's looking more so to maximize that as opposed to, only making 50,000 versus 250,000 on an investment over 5 years. And so I think it's really important to just respect the market and respect the process. And I think if you do that, you'll really set yourself up for success. But, you could make a mistake by buying in a bad building with, known issues. You could make a mistake by buying a floor plan and not really realizing that it's an awful floor plan. You can buy a house and not really realize what's going to happen 3 doors down in a year from now because there's a city application that nobody's checked. There are just so many ways that you can make bad decisions and take bad actions that in the long term might play itself out okay, but versus all the other possible outcomes will look awfully poor. And I cannot tell you how many people come to us on the buy side and on the sale side, waiting for their buyer contract or the sales contract to expire so that they can just talk to us because they felt uncomfortable with the relationship that they've had. And I think it's just really a shame that people hadn't done a lot of that heavy lifting in terms of due diligence and interviewing before jumping into bed working with an agent.
So that leads me to 2 more questions. One is, can you give a little bit more context about that contract, which would be the BRA, the buyer rep agreement? That's part one. And then the second one being, people are sort of locked into these contracts and then they've decided to make a change in their representation. What is the usual sentiment that's coming from them after making that shift? So let's start with the BRA.
Yeah, like a BRA, a buyer representation agreement, is something that an agent will ask or can ask or require a buyer client to sign, working with them for a specific period of time generally. So usually it's like 3 months or 6 months that they're locked in to that representation with that agent. We at Fox Marin do not do that. And it's something that is just integral in our values is we believe that we're always adding enough value to the client and the client experience that they would never want to make a decision without us, not ever feeling that they're forced into making a decision. And over, 17 years or whatever, that policy that which we started literally from day one has never come to bite us. And the only time we actually will ask a client to sign a buyer representation agreement is when they actually have to. And it's when they're actually offering on a specific property. And we will make that buyer rep specific to that property so that if the offer doesn't go through, they're still not locked into working with us, because we believe that if you're adding enough value, you shouldn't have to have that contract for 6 months or 3 months or whatever. And I'm sure a lot of the listeners and watchers of this video and conversation have probably heard those horror stories out there where they met somebody at an open house, or they met somebody's brother or cousin or friend, and they signed this 6-month contract, and a month or two into it, they're like, oh my gosh, this is just awful. And we're not getting anything out of it, or we're feeling highly pressured by it. And we get those calls, and, in those circumstances, we cannot talk to them or seem to be doing anything that's soliciting their business while they're under contract working with another agent. And so we've had to wait for these to expire, or for them to ask to get out, or speak to the broker of record to get out of these contracts. So that is a really good point, just for discussion. Beware if an agent is asking you to sign one of these BRAs, who you're signing that contract with, the term of that contract, and is this somebody that you feel comfortable making that type of commitment from the outset in working with them and getting locked into that. So it's not something somebody shouldn't necessarily do, but it's something, again, that you should take a lot of consideration before proceeding with somebody asking you to sign that type of a contract.
Yeah, I remember this one agent that I know was telling me that he was going to take the summer off.
Yes.
And he's like, yeah, I'm going to take the summer off. I'm just going to chill. He's like, but I locked in all my buyers by making them sign buyer rep agreements, so they can't buy anything without me, even though I'm not going to be here for the next 2 or 3 months because I'm going traveling. And I was like,
it's crazy.
What? Like, I had a really hard time not making a face. Like, could you imagine that? So I think this is a really good tidbit for the listeners out there is be warned by BRA contracts. And yes, like full transparency, but also like what is the rationale for the agent that wants you to sign it? And a lot of the time they're looking after their own best interests by having you sign the BRA. It's really not protecting you, the client, by signing a BRA. It's protecting the agent's time. So I am not a big fan of them for so many reasons. And so, yeah, eyes wide open anytime you're asked to sign one of those, and be very, very clear about what you're signing. And like Ralph said, the terms and how long and everything else in between. Okay, so let's assume now that we've connected with a new buyer. They're ready to make this acquisition. Now at this stage, they've got their pre-approval. They've figured out who their agent is. They're feeling really comfortable about that. They've interviewed several people. They feel like they have the right partner in their corner. Where, Ralph, would you start with this new buyer if they selected Fox Marin or our team or you or one of the buyer agents on our team to start their search? What would be the first part of the process? Would they go out looking at places, or like what happens now?
We have a very in-depth onboarding process. And I think process is such a key word. And for anybody considering looking or wanting to work with an agent, I think that's a great first question is like, what is your process? And how do you onboard a buyer agent? And so over the years, we've developed a process where we have a customized survey or intake form that goes out to the prospective client. They take a lot of time to put their information and thoughts down, which in and of itself is really helpful. We then take that information back and then we basically make that into a 2 hour, hour and a half kickstart
deep dive
boot camp. Yeah. And we book it on an online call, or sometimes we do it in person. And we really take them through the process of buying. We talk to them about the market. We talk to them about market realities. And they can also come in with any preconceived concerns or questions that they have. And it's a really good way to start a search based on somebody's search parameters and fears and concerns and anxieties about moving forward like this on the first conversation. So we really spend a lot of time with that process, and then we even go further in depth where we have future calls where we set up their search parameters online, so they're actually partaking in the search parameters that then get set up for them. We also do mock offers, which I think is just so important to do, where we take a property that a client is interested in and we pretend that they're going to offer on it. And they go through the offer and the paperwork. And it's just like working out. It's just like exercising a muscle, so that when the actual time comes to offering on a property, they then understand the process and they're not second guessing the process. Generally speaking, what we'll do the first time out with a client is we'll show them a wide variety of properties, and then hopefully start to narrow down over time and become more specific as we go, because we're able to flesh out the pros and cons, the likes, the dislikes. And we're very big on communication, and it's really important, the dynamic between the agent and the client. And sometimes even if it's a couple or a partnership, that we're able to flesh out everybody's needs and wants, and understanding that it's a process and that sometimes what you think you want isn't what you're going to end up with, because as you go through the process, things that you didn't think were important become very important, and vice versa.
And I love in the onboarding sessions, and I agree, they're like a good 90 minutes, 2-hour conversation, that buyers all have different experience levels and have so many different questions. Like some people really like to spend a lot of time on the process of offering in multiples and what does that look like? And they might not have ever heard of what a bully offer is, or like how much do you need for your deposit versus your down payment, and land transfer taxes. Like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that you couldn't roll them into your mortgage and that those are required cash on closing. Like there's so many different aspects of the onboarding process that we spend time on. Some people really love to talk about the market nuances, macro, micro, what area is hot to invest in. Am I better buying a condo townhouse, or am I better buying a condo suite, and why? And so it's such a great opportunity to brainstorm and then flesh out all those gray areas where there's confusion or questions. And I think, like I said, people come from so many different experience levels. And we talk about this even in the onboarding session, everybody's talking about their buy process with their friends and their colleagues at work and their family, and everyone has an opinion about real estate. Everyone, including your Uber driver and your hairdresser and your Starbucks barista. And so I think a lot of the time at this very stage in the process, once somebody lets word out that they're looking for a house or looking for a condo, then all of a sudden they start getting sound bites of information and opinions from all over the place. And you can get really muddled in the process with all of that. And it can be very overwhelming, and it can just add to the fear, because you're like, oh, somebody's like, oh, don't buy now. And somebody else is like, oh, you should buy here. My friend bought here. Oh, my friend got a deal offline here. And it's just like, it just turns into a mosh pit of opinions. So this is an additional way to add some clarity and to at least get some structure around the process for you, because it's going to be about your way of doing it and what you want for yourself, not what your aunt says or, what your personal trainer told you while you're doing sets that morning. So huge, huge, huge. And I love that we spend the time doing this. And I don't think we have one buyer in our roster over the years we've been doing this that would regret spending the time with us.
No, and it's one of the things we tell our clients right from the outset. You have to respect the process and you have to treat it like a part-time job.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to make that commitment. There's a really good quote by Jim Rohn where it's like, you can't pay someone to do your push-ups for you. Meaning that you can have the best agent with the best communication and the best experience and the best outcomes working with you. But if you're not responding to their emails or you're not giving feedback or you're not engaged, you're not setting yourself up for success. And it's really important to go into something like this, eyes wide open, knowing that this is a very large transaction. This is a very big commitment and that it demands your attention. And I think if you're doing that in tandem with a great agent, you're going to have an excellent opportunity to have a great outcome.
So in the presentation, I know that, or sorry, not the presentation, the onboarding presentation. So yeah, I guess it is. I know that we spend a lot of time talking about why Toronto is a great market to invest. Could you just give a little bit of a preview as to what that might look like? Maybe like your top 5 high-level reasons why investing in the Toronto real estate market is a smart, long-term strategic decision. Could you just give our listeners some insight on that?
Yeah, I think the key thing with any investment decision is to go back to what you just said, long-term. And if you look at any great investor or any great investment strategy, it is the ability to think long-term. And when you look at the history of the Toronto real estate market and you start to understand the fundamentals that have driven it and will continue to impact its future, the long-term outcome becomes very clear. And I think it's really important to understand that there's just so much noise, like what you were saying earlier, Kori, with people, conversations, all of these things bombarding you. But that's all that is noise. And when you tune out the noise and you step back and you think long-term and you zoom out, the situation or the obvious becomes exceedingly clear. And I think people tend to muddle it up far too much. And when you look at any market, if you just bring it down to its base level core, it's supply and demand. And when you look at Toronto real estate, it is a hyper story of supply and demand. And when you extrapolate that out into the future, it will continue to be so, even at a greater extreme. And so the things that we like to talk about are the green belt. And it's one of the most important aspects of understanding Toronto real estate, because essentially in 2005, the Liberal government passed legislation which created protective lands all the way running in a belt, in a semicircle around the outside of Toronto. And that, in conjunction with the lake to the south, has essentially made Toronto an island. And so we do have a limited amount of land that is not infinite. And I think that's when you see that visual, it's really helpful to a first-time buyer to understand why there is so much stress surrounding Toronto real estate. That stress surrounds the fact that we don't have an infinite supply of land. We are an island. We're just a bigger version of Manhattan. And so I think that is one real constraint that is seconded by the demand side, which is where you have this tremendous influx of immigration. And the numbers are just astounding. Like Ontario itself grew by 500,000 people in the last year alone. 50% of all immigrants, when they come to Toronto, end up in the GTA, which makes sense because it's one of the most multicultural cities in the world. And no matter where you come from, there's going to be a demographic to welcome you here with open arms. And there's also going to be the greatest amount of economic opportunity because Toronto is the financial hub of Canada and it has the most dynamic economy anywhere in the country. And so when people come to Canada, they're very drawn to coming to live here or to invest here. And so we have this incredible pressure from a rental standpoint and from a resale standpoint, really that is just relentless. And it's one of the flaws that we have with our government in that while we are very pro-immigration, there is no housing strategy to house all of these people. And then you have the other component too, which is less talked about when you think about Toronto real estate from the demand side, are millennials. And you have the average age of a first-time buyer is 35 years old. And the average age of a millennial, I think, is like 26 to 34, like in that sort of range. And so you have, 1/3, the largest section of Canadian population after the baby boomers, all coming in about to be first-time buyers in conjunction with competing with all these immigrants that are coming here with a very finite amount of land. And then when you start to understand the supply component a little further, knowing that land is limited, what you start to realize is we just simply aren't building enough in this city. And, people will say, oh my gosh, look at all these cranes that are in the sky. Well, each crane only represents 400 units max. And if you have 10 of them, they're not all, or 20 of them, some are commercial, and they're not all coming online at the same time. And these buildings are like 80 or 90, but most likely 90 to 95% sold by the time they've even put a shovel in the ground. And so, the numbers that we're looking at with immigration and demand from baby boomers, we're looking at having need somewhere in the GTA of about 150,000 to 200,000 new homes per year. We're delivering on average about 40,000. And so that shortfall is going to only exacerbate, especially over COVID, where you've had this dramatic slowdown in new development and in housing starts, in conjunction with the increase of costs to build and in interest costs for developers to build. And so anything that's existing to replace that is going to be awfully expensive. Like, we're already looking at the average pre-construction condo in downtown Toronto at that anywhere between $1,500 to $1,700 a square foot. And then you start to get into luxury at, $2,000 plus. So, when you start to understand all of that, and then you look at the way Canada is pictured and positioned, and Toronto is positioned into the future, you start to realize that the writing is on the wall, that there's going to be a tremendous amount of demand for real estate, and we're just not going to be able to keep up with that demand. And I think that pressure is only going to get worse over time and not better.
Well, I think that any buyer that has the opportunity to work with you and talk to you about this before they start their search is going to get so much context around the value of bricks and mortar in this city and the long-term return that they probably will see, and how motivating it can be once you start to understand some of these key fundamentals, these that I don't see changing anytime soon. So anyone who's privy to talking to Ralph about this, he's very passionate about the Toronto real estate market and this specific aspect of what he does. So if you're interested in taking that deeper dive into like the macro picture and the micro picture of what's happening here in the city, like please reach out or comment, and there's some great videos as well in Ralph's playlist on this channel that takes a closer look at some of these key elements. I think it's worth looking at. You're going to feel really pumped by it. And I know the first time that I ever talked to you about it, I was like, oh my gosh, I was so blown away by all these key elements. And you're just so articulate about it. And I think that it's really, really important, buyers out there, that you understand this. Because it's not just all about like pretty finishes in a nice white kitchen. I mean, obviously that's fun too. Don't get me wrong. I love that stuff too. Don't get me wrong. But there's there's a big vision behind this. So I think there's a lot to be learned. So I love that. So as we talk about that, can you just help the viewers understand, particularly our first timers, our newbies, are we currently in a seller's market right now or a buyer's market or a balanced market? And can you just explain it? Because these terms get tossed out all the time. And I think if you're new, you're like, what the hell does that even mean? I don't even understand what they're talking about, the seller's market thing. So could you just add a little color there?
Yeah, like one of the best metrics, and we look at this every month, is months of inventory. And so what months of inventory represents is at the current rate of sales, if you took everything that's on the market and nothing came out, how long would it take everything to sell on the market? And currently we are at just under 2 months. I think it's like 1.88 months in the GTA. So to give context, 4 to 6 months is considered balanced. Anything less than 4 months is in a seller's market. So we are by definition deeply in a seller's market. And if you look at stats like days on the market, properties still sell relative to other markets around the world at a blistering pace. Like we're 20 days on the market, somewhere in that range right now. And if you look at, New York or Manhattan, you could be looking at, 180 days plus to sell a property. And so things move very quickly here. We are still very much in the seller's market. I think, if something goes over 30 days on the market, people start panicking and they're like, what's wrong with the property and everything else, where, that would be a blistering sales speed for virtually anywhere else. And so in context, by definition, by any metric you look at it, Toronto is still very much in the seller's market. Sentiment has been shifting, which is something that we talked about earlier, and markets like certainty, and there's a little bit of uncertainty in the market. So I feel like there's a bit of a pause and a bit of negativity coming from the next media sales cycle. And we are all the media news cycle, but it is a sales cycle. Funny I said that. And I think we're also going into summer, which is traditionally a lot slower pace in real estate, understandably, to begin with. But I think we are probably in for a slow fall. But, ever since the Bank of Canada started doing what it's been doing, which has been raising rates for the last year, we have been in a very low transaction environment. We're talking like 30, 40-year lows in terms of volume or properties changing hands. But because inventory is so tight relative to the demand, properties have been selling really, really quickly and prices have been rising. That seems to be cooling off for the short term, but it won't be indefinitely this way forever.
So when you say we're in a seller's market, which I obviously know we are in by definition, does that mean the sellers have all the power?
Yeah, it's kind of like an equilibrium, and the pendulum can swing. And the pendulum is always moving. In Toronto, it's just measurements typically of how deep of a seller's market we're in. Sellers in a seller's market have more of the power because there are more buyers than sellers. However, as sentiment starts to shift, we are seeing conditions showing up in offers. We are seeing buyers having more leverage than they typically would in offer scenarios because there isn't that type of FOMO or there isn't that type of velocity to the market that there was only a few months ago. Like we can go back to like April or May where, sellers truly had all the power. That seems to be shifting a little bit for sure, which I think is good and I think is healthy. And, if I had my wish, we'd be in much more of a balanced market than a hyper seller's market. I don't think it's healthy mentally or physically or spiritually or financially, or emotionally for everybody involved to continually be in this inventory strapped environment that is the Toronto real estate market. I don't think anybody wishes it. And I think that's, again, just a little side note here is a lot of people think that that's all real estate agents want. They want to pump the market and they want to go. No, we want a situation where everybody is treated fairly. We want a situation where people have time to breathe and make the best decisions, where there isn't that undue pressure that's on people all the time. It's just a much more healthy environment to be in a more balanced market. And I think any experienced real estate agent will tell you that.
I love breathing personally.
Oh, yeah.
For our listeners out there, can you give some sort of idea about value? Like, could you buy, let's say, for example, a condo in Toronto for $500,000? Like, is that even possible? Can you buy a house or low rise for under $1 million? Like, is that actually possible? Can you just sort of give some range of value? And I'll jump in here too.
Yeah, and it's such a great question. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to step back a second and we're going to talk about this thing called the property ladder. And a lot of first-time buyers or a lot of millennials coming into the market think that they just want to buy their dream house on the first go. And if you look at most people who are in their dream houses and you ask how they got to their dream property, they'll probably tell you about 2, 3, 4 moves that they had to make to get there. And so patience or, the ability to, make do with what you have is not culturally as acceptable as it used to be. But in a market that's as expensive and fast moving as Toronto, it really is where the average person needs to be because it just is so expensive to buy and own here. But the one tenement is you'll never be able to outsave the Toronto real estate market. And it's really important if you have the ability to acquire something that is within your means and it works for you, or it could work for you for a period of time, then that first strategic move will be such a brilliant long-term move that will set you up for success. And so, yeah, like if your budget is $500,000, okay, well, I'm going to buy a studio then, and we have a lot of clients doing that. And interestingly enough, those have been the highest performing asset in the condo market in terms of sizes because of affordability. And Kori and I are very big from an investment standpoint on the little guys. You don't have to blow your brains out and you don't have to force yourself into something you can't necessarily afford, or force yourself to sit outside the market and remain a renter, which is never a good decision because you can't buy your dream house on the first go. If you're thinking long-term and you're thinking strategically, you make that great first move, even if it's a studio. And that could set you up and your family up, even your future family and your future self up by making that type of a move. And so absolutely, you can find a studio for under $500,000 in the city. And you can definitely find a house maybe outside the city, maybe requiring some work, but it still is possible to find those type of properties, especially if you have a vision or you have the ability to do some renovations. That is very helpful. Those houses are out there, but you're really going to have to stretch. And maybe, that house becomes a townhouse, and that townhouse on your next purchase after that one becomes your future home.
Yeah, I love that. That's such great advice. And so I think a good litmus test is, downtown Toronto resale. Mm-hmm. Condos are trading, depending on the area. Of course, there's a massive caveat here. I would say you're looking at about $1,000 to $1,200 a foot for mm-hmm. residential resale. Obviously, in more luxury neighborhoods, you're paying a bit more premium. And then, as you mentioned earlier, new construction's trading at a lot higher price per square foot. So I think that will give you a sensibility around value. And for sure, you can get a little guy for $500,000 or under. Big fan of the little guys. Big fan.
Love the little guys.
Love the little guys.
And you know what? Like if you get, and the difference with the little guys, the efficiency of floor plans. Like if you get a really good 450, it's hard to say this, but if you get a really good 450 square foot layout, it can be superior to a 650 square foot suite. From natural light to outdoor space to
functionality,
functionality,
flow,
100%,
ceiling heights, all of those things. Actually, and we have a whole podcast dedicated to floor plans. So if you're interested in hearing about that one, it's on our playlist as well. And it's really, really, really helpful. And we talk about the little guys and we talk about some other different varieties of floor plans and what to look for. And then in terms of houses, for sure, like I am such a big fan of like obviously there's like drive till you can afford it, which I totally think is a real thing.
Drive to qualify.
Drive till you can qualify, which I totally agree. But then also, even in some more central neighborhoods, like there are some really, really cute potential little bungalows on great lots that are 2-bedroom, 1-bath, and they're called bungalofts. I love that. And you can totally, if you've got any imagination at all, or the ability to design or renovate or hire somebody to help you, or maybe your parents are really good with a hammer, whatever it might be, your best friend. I think there's lots of opportunity in that range as well. And start small. Just start small. It's okay. It's better to get in than just to wait for 5 years and then just be outpriced. So I do agree, though, that to have stars in your eyes and think, for $1 million, you're going to be living in South Riverdale proper in a 3-bedroom, 2-washroom with a basement apartment for additional income with private driveway, parking, and a fenced-in backyard and an exposed brick wall. Not happening. Not happening.
But that's okay. Keep that fire, keep that dream, and just keep working towards it and chipping away at it and be strategic about it, and it will come. I think the most important thing to understand is in any major city in the world, the majority of people don't own and they are renters. And we are in that type of situation here in Toronto where if that window hasn't closed, it's closing fast. And the opportunity to not be a renter and to have equity and to have ownership is still here, and that window is closing. And so your ability to not have to try and outsave the market by having a piece of the market would be the best single advice I could give anybody who's younger or considering buying or considering investing. And I'd also go on to say that one of our typical investor clients are somebody who owns a house, have seen the value of their condo or of their home go up in value while their RSPs stay relatively flat. And they've seen everybody else around them do well on their real estate investments. And they're like, well, how can we passively leverage what we already know and have learned about the Toronto real estate market by securing our future, by making a really astute investments? And oftentimes those are the type of investment clients that we work with. And, again, if you think long-term, you can really set yourself up for a great opportunity in Toronto real estate.
Excellent. After your new buyer has now been educated, they've been pre-approved, they've got a great agent, they've been looking at properties, they're narrowing in on neighborhoods, asset class, they're getting more comfortable with the dynamics of the market. How do they know, and how do you know as their broker if they found a good opportunity?
Well, one of the things that I think is really important to us at Fox Marin is I think it's really important to empower our client to be able to make their own decision and not feel pressured into it or feel like they're making the decision for somebody else's reasons or potentially for the wrong reasons. And so one of the things I'm really big on is getting tactile and going out and seeing properties, like touching, feeling properties, because a lot of times, especially some of our younger clients, just try and do this all online. And you can't do that with real estate. Real estate is tactile. And so getting out and seeing properties and then knowing what they sell for is the best way for you yourself to intuitively understand the value of a property and what we were talking about earlier, what's important to you and what's not important to you. And so there are different ways that you can evaluate a property. One is on its market value. The other is on its value to you. And the other is, if you're competing for it, what is the opportunity cost to not lose out on this property, knowing that this might be a one-of-a-kind type of property that may not come up because you know that because you've seen enough properties. So I think it's really, really important to be able to have gone through the process enough where you yourself as a buyer intuitively know the value of properties, can understand the value of properties, and can understand the value of properties to you yourself. And when a buyer gets to that point as an agent or as a buyer agent, that's when you know inherently that your client is ready to buy. And sometimes that can take 6 months. Sometimes that can take 3 months. Sometimes that can take a week. Like, everybody is different on this journey because of what they're bringing to this journey and process. And sometimes because of their timelines as to when they want to get to where they want to be. And so it can take a lot of time. The time is almost irrelevant, as it is getting somebody to that point where they feel confident themselves with your help and with your guidance and with your leadership and with your opinion to be able to make their own decision.
It's funny because my very next question is, how long does this process normally take for buyers? So
it's funny when you work with sometimes type A type buyers, they'll be like, so how am I doing? Like, am I on track? Am I taking too much time? Am I taking not enough time? To some people who are competitive and have that sort of spirit within them, they really become aware and sometimes use that to put pressure on themselves, which then we try and extract. Because when you're making these type of decisions, you never really want to be doing it under arbitrary pressure. You want to be doing it for the right reasons. So I don't think there is any specific time. I think everybody is different and every market is different and every situation is different. And sometimes the same buyer buying for a second time may take longer than they did the first time because they felt that they rushed into that first decision and now they're going to take their time. Or sometimes it's the opposite where it's like, oh, we love the experience. We followed the market. We've never stopped. We're obsessed. We love House Sigma. We're ready to go. And so everyone is different and it's really not a one size fits all. And that's why having a good fit with who you're working with and who is going to help guide you through the process is so important.
Huge. So in what ways have you seen buyers get in their own way? And why do they do that?
Yeah, it's called analysis paralysis. And it's when people start to just overanalyze everything. And usually those are the people that have the most challenged purchases, and sometimes the most problematic ones are generally with the people who just overanalyze. And I had a mentor, and he's no longer with us, but he built a significant real estate empire. And, he told me, that his number one mantra was feet first. And you can't know all the possible things that can happen. Nobody knows. Do your due diligence, use your brain, use your spreadsheets, use your gut, and then jump and figure it out on the way. And the people that we've seen who spend so much time trying to time the market, those are the ones who end up listing their home March 20th, 2020.
So true.
Like we've had clients where they could have listed within a 2-year span, but they were so intent on trying to time everything and make everything work out perfectly on their own timelines with, so many different variables all taken into consideration. The universe will generally push back on those type of people. The people who walk into a house and just look for problems, those generally are the people who will buy a house and have the 1 in a million problems that nobody and no inspector and no agent could have ever foreseen. And so I think having that ability to trust your gut and your instinct once you've done a base level of research is so important. And we see so many people in this process start to get in their own way. And I think the key thing is to just get out of your own way and trust your gut and trust your reasons for doing what you want to do without second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth guessing them.
So you mentioned the word trust and listen to your gut. Is there anything else that could make a good buyer great?
Yeah, I think once you sort of define, I think the first thing to make a buyer great is define your goals and figure out and understand clearly what your objectives are. And sometimes those objectives can change. So it's important to be not entirely rigid, to be a little bit fluid, but to be realistic in understanding the long-term opportunity that you have potentially in front of you. And I find that anybody who's done really well in Toronto real estate has been willing to stretch themselves, has been willing to stretch themselves within means, obviously, but stretch themselves in terms of their ability to acquire something that might be a little bit pushing them, their ability to stretch themselves into being uncomfortable slightly, and slightly scared themselves. And I think if you're willing to do those things in a mitigated, thoughtful way, by partnering with somebody that you can work with and be coached by as you go through this process, those are the clients who generally tend to do really, really well. And those are the ones, 3-4 years down the road that tend to find themselves in a really good spot.
You keep taking the words right out of my mouth, because my next question was going to be, like, how long should a buyer be willing to wait until they see the fruits of their labor on their investment? So is it a 3-year wait till you're like, oh, I did really well? Is it 5 years? Like, how long does that take, and what should buyers expect from that?
It depends. I mean, we are such believers in Toronto real estate that we often will talk our clients out of selling, which is something most real estate agents would never think of doing. And we do that coming from the perspective is if you're going to sell, you should be really clear on your reasons for selling and what the next opportunity is for the capital that you've saved and made and been able to take advantage of in terms of appreciation. And oftentimes we will try to encourage our clients to pull out equity and to refinance and use that leverage to buy a second property. And it is such an important thing because, yes, you have a principal residence and you can say, well, I bought this house in Leslieville for 1.5 and now it's worth 1.9. But the problem is that if you want to stay in Toronto, you have to sell and buy in that market. But if you have an investment property or you have 2 investment properties and you have that portfolio, then you're really able to start to leverage the appreciation and the long-term opportunity that Toronto presents. And so every case is different. Every situation is different. Interest rates can differ. Financial situations, life situations can dramatically differ. But we're always encouraging people who are looking at Toronto to think about it from an investment standpoint as well as a lifestyle standpoint. And the two very much go hand in hand. And it's a scale sometimes where you're weighing the two sides of it, do we buy in this area? Yeah, it's up and coming, but it's still not there and it's a little dodgy. And, do we make do with this? But we have the ability to get into something that's a bigger size footprint or a bigger, more expensive type of asset class to sacrifice the short term for the long term game. So there's a lot to weigh into it, but I really think that if you go into it with the mindset knowing that in 5 or 10 years from now, the population of Toronto is going to be sky high, knowing that supply is not going to have kept up, and making your decisions based on that, I think you'll be very well served. And trying to figure out how to climb that property ladder or investment ladder is really what's going to pay off, not should you do something in 3 years or 4 years. It should be a much longer term, thought out strategy.
Could not have said it better myself.
Well, thank you, Kori.
So, Ralph, if you were to go back and talk to your 25-year-old real estate self, it's not that long ago.
No.
What advice would you give your 25-year-old self about Toronto and the real estate market here?
Double down.
So what does that mean?
It means to be even more fearless and to believe in it even more than I did. And it's not that I never believed in the market, but there's always doubts, even for somebody such as myself. And, I think I'm very blessed with the investments and the business and the decisions that we've made. But I think my biggest regret would be the few properties that we've sold, and not to have sold those properties. And as much as I've stretched myself and you've stretched yourself and we've stretched ourselves to stretch even more, I think would have been the advice that I would have given my 25-year-old real estate self. Because knowing what I know now and looking into the future, it's pretty awfully exciting about the long-term potential.
Totally. I don't know if I could have stretched myself any more than I did.
Yeah.
But I agree with that advice. I don't know if there was
We've definitely sold a few properties we regret.
Definitely sold a couple that we regret. I don't know if I could have gotten in any earlier than I did. Like maybe I could have started earlier mentally. Like maybe if I had started thinking it, like I have a really good friend from high school that was really smart, and in university, she asked her dad to partner with her to acquire a condo while she was in university. And he helped her invest in her first property. And so by the time she had graduated from U of T, she had already put a significant dent into her mortgage by working part-time while she was in school. And she had an asset, I would say like 7 years before anyone else I knew did. And that was pretty brilliant. So I think if anything, I'd be like, I could have started a little bit earlier. Stretching, I'm not sure I could have done anymore, but agree that would be similar advice that I would give myself, and certainly kicking our butts about selling anything. And if you could give our newbie buyers tuning in today one piece of advice from this conversation, just one, what would it be, Ralph?
Do the work. Treat it as an incredible opportunity to potentially buy or one day acquire real estate, and do the work. Do the due diligence. See properties. Interview agents. Read blogs. Watch podcasts. Jump on YouTube. Find people that you can rely on as great sources of information. Educate yourself. Think for yourself. And figure out what makes the most sense for you and who would be the best potential people to partner with, and surround yourself with a team.
Well, Ralph, I love that advice. I think also the idea that this is actually like, just to clarify what you said or to add to it, is that this is an opportunity and you're not a victim to the market. Like, this is an opportunity to still be able to get into a big cosmopolitan city and own a piece of it for yourself, versus the other perspective, which could be like, it's not fair, it's too expensive, this is too difficult, I can't do it. So-and-so's parents bought them this place, so-and-so inherited this money, this person is not fair. I think it's the shift of attitude of being like, I want to do this for myself, and I'm going to find any means possible to do it, whether it's working a part-time job or starting with a small pre-construction condo or buying a little studio or starting on the outskirts of the city and then moving in, whatever it might be. I think reframing
or taking a partner, or talking to people who have been successful and asking what they did to get to that point in life. And if you focus on it, you will figure out a way somehow to start to move into your vision.
Well, Ralph, this has been excellent. Thank you so much. That really wraps up our conversation for today. We dove deep into the Toronto real estate market and the critical first steps to kick off your home buying journey. So whether you're a first-time buyer or an experienced investor, there's something in this episode for everybody. Remember, the real estate journey isn't a decision made overnight. It's a process. And at Fox Marin, we're committed to understanding your vision and your plans and empowering you with knowledge and tools to make that a reality. We hope today's episode has brought you closer to owning a piece of Toronto real estate. And we've illuminated the path to finding a good agent and a mortgage broker and equipped you with some options to seize opportunities that are out there for you. And remember, every journey begins with the very first step, and we are here to take that first step right beside you. And as Confucius says, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, and the second best time is right now. So I hope you found a lot of value in this episode. Please, please, please feel free to comment. We're super nice and helpful around these parts, so do not be afraid to reach out. And Ralph, how do you close off every episode?
Please smash that subscribe button or like button. We'd absolutely love to hear from you, and we'll see you next week.
All right. Ciao. Thank you.
Bye.